we have reached our last phyla. Yay! So we are now at chordates, which include you, but it also includes a lot of other organisms that are not vertebrates. All vertebrates are chordates, but not all chordates are vertebrates. We'll explain this. I briefly want to introduce you to the four major characteristics of this phyla. So we'll look more at vertebrate evolution and diversity later on, including things like the crazy platypus. But for now, I want to give you an introduction to things that you need to be familiar with to understand chordate and vertebrate evolution. So when we start out this basic phyla, which is anything but basic, we know that our ancestors to the animal kingdom were in Protists, but we have moved pretty far along the animal tree at this point. And when we look at chordates, I know you would think about mammals and probably reptiles and amphibians and maybe some fish, but the rest of these are probably going to be pretty weird to you. We don't actually start to see vertebrates until here, with the addition of our derived characteristic of a vertebral column. These three at the top, still chordates, they still have these four developmental characteristics I'm going to show you, but they don't have a vertebral column. Okay? So there are about 50,000 species in Chordata, and again, we've got to look at subphyla, primarily because in development we look at some very different characteristics as we move into adulthood in some of these organisms. So Cephalochordata, you know cephalo, what's that? It's a head chordate. Urochordata we'll look at, and the vertebrata are animals that have a vertebral column. And by this we mean you have a skeletal structure that surrounds your spinal cord. So Cephalochordata are head chordates, vertebrates, and then these weird Urochordata. Look at these things. If I would give you these things and tell you that they are your close relative, you would think I was off my rocker, right? Okay, but they are, because they have what we call a notochord. So in development, there are four features that are common to every single chordate. One is a notochord. That's first and foremost. This is formed during development, very early on, and it will give us structure and support, and in adult forms for our vertebrates, it will become part of our vertebral column. A dorsal nerve cord. This is important. We've seen nerve cords before. We saw them in earthworms. They were on their ventral side. In you and in the chordates, it's on the dorsal side, so on the back side. Pharyngeal gill slits, or pharyngeal slits. In fish, we'll talk about them associated with gills. That's where they get their name. But in you, we actually talk about them becoming middle and inner ear bones. This is kind of fun. And a tail. Now, before you say, but I don't have a tail, I disagree. We'll look at your tail. So in kind of picture or diagram form here for you, we show you some of these characteristics. So the notochord, think about a notochord kind of being like the consistency of a piece of licorice, a Twizzler, if you were. So it gives flexibility, it gives a little bit of support, it's kind of rigid, but it's certainly not skeletal, right? But for some organisms, that's fine. This is a lamprey. That's a fine structure for here, okay? But when we start looking at a further development, we're going to have to add skeletal structures to most of our chordates. Dorsal nerve cord we mentioned, tail we mentioned, and pharyngeal slits we mentioned. All of these things, regardless if you are a zebra or a lancelet or anything in between, we have to deal with these kinds of features. Now, when we look at the development in you, we'll see these structures morph or go through a change that may make them different in different species, but they all start out in the same areas developmentally. So if we look at this odd tunicate thing I was showing you earlier, this is its larval stage and its adult stage. So even though it doesn't look anything like you in its adult form, in the juvenile form, there are a lot of similarities, right? Now, you might not think of yourself much as being a slug, but you were kind of slug-like as an embryo. And here's your little tail in case you're curious. This is you all folded up. This is your tail at 8 weeks and your tail at 10 weeks. So we do see that reduction. You kind of grow into your tail more than losing it. So there are still some individuals, of course, that are born with a tail. And for most individuals, the parents immediately say, cut it off. We don't want to try to buy pants that we have to squish a tail through, right? So for most organisms, at least for humans, we look at you not having an outward tail in your adult form. However, if you've ever slipped and fell on the ice in the wintertime and hit your tailbone, you know how painful that can be, and you are well aware that you have a tail.